Livestream, and this is a really exciting one where we're going to discuss about everything that's new at WWDC with SwiftUI 3, with iOS 15, and hopefully this is working because this is the first time I'm using Streamlabs OBS. Previously I was using Ecamm Live, and the reason why is because I upgraded everything to Monterey, which means that some of the apps don't work, including Crisp, which is what I use for noise cancellation. So if you can let me know if the sound is working fine and if the stream is working fine, that would be much appreciated. So everything is upgraded, and I'm gonna check the comments. If everything is good, I'm gonna keep going. So, all right. I haven't received feedback yet, so let me just make sure that everything's fine. Let me just go to the stream. Okay, all right, we got some comments coming in. So the sound is perfect. If everything is good, then I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna start. So, also, you know, I just upgraded everything to the new M1 Mac. As you can see right here, this is the screen for my M1 computer. I picked the blue one, and I also had, I think, 16 gigs of RAMs, which is a little bit more performant, and everything is going so fast, which means that I'm living the M1 life now. So you're gonna see that, you know, when I'm gonna be demoing everything, hopefully it's going to be a lot faster than usual from my previous live streams. So exciting stuff today, because there's a lot of materials, and Apple has done such a tremendous work putting a lot of materials for developers to take a look at. Now, I'm gonna give some suggestions because I come from a more design background. And typically when I look at the updates, I look at the layouts, the animations, I look at, you know, what could be exciting for beginners who have never touched SwiftUI before. And I like to experiment stuff that could also apply to my work. And we actually have some really good news, which is that, you know, our iOS app that we've been working for the past 6 months has been approved, which means that I think on Monday we're gonna green light it, and then we're gonna release it to the world. And so we're really excited about that. Now, why it's taking longer is because, you know, we had to deal with some small issues with SwiftUI pertaining to performance specifically. We've been trying a lot of new animations and material sheets and scroll specifically that are not necessarily our fault, but also shows to kind of like where we've come with SwiftUI, right? Like they're still improving. And in fact, with iOS 15, I installed that on my iPhone. The app is even more performant. So we've been trying to get to that 60 frames per second on every single screen, you know, when you're scrolling and all that stuff. So we work really hard to get there. And that's why we've taken a lot longer to get things, you know, to the App Store. But I'm really excited. This also means that thanks to all of this experience that we've had optimizing the app and, you know, going from A to Z, we can take that experience and teach you guys, right? So we just recently launched SwiftUI Combine. We're definitely getting to the new async await. We're also gonna get into the new Canvas API, build iOS apps with Swift Playgrounds on the iPad. So some of those things we really want to teach our customers, and we're really excited about that. Now, let's take a look at some of the, you know, WWDC video I watched. And so, you know, if you haven't downloaded the app yet, you should go to the App Store, both on the Mac, on the iPhone, the iPad. Just download the app called Developer. And there you're going to be able to find all the videos. You're going to be able to bookmark the videos. You're going to be able to continue watching and download for offline. A lot of that experience that we actually want in our app, actually. So we've been doing offline mode and, continue watching and all that stuff. It's not easy, right? Like building an app with all of those features is not easy for anyone. So the app that we're building at Design Plus Code is not simple. But what is fun about that is the knowledge that we can use that experience and kind of like teach similar techniques so that you can use that and build your own app as well. Now, I've watched this week about 10, 12 videos, specifically focusing on SF Symbol 3, which I believe is pretty much one of the biggest updates of this year, where you have a ton more options. So what's new in SF Symbols? SF Symbols in SwiftUI, and explore the new SF Symbols 3 app, SF Symbol Preview. No, not this one, but this is from last year. But there are like 4 videos about SF Symbol that I watch just in a day. Obviously, you should watch what's new in SwiftUI. This is super important. Platforms, State of the Union, that is essential for anyone. And if you design, and I think everyone should, the practice of inclusive design, I think this is kind of like extending on a topic of accessibility, and this is even more important nowadays. So this is a very good watch to talk and discuss and apply about inclusive design, accessibility, a lot of options, new options that you can apply, especially for SwiftUI. You have a ton of options nowadays that's going to apply to all the platforms at the same time. So this is really important. And another thing that we're going to be touching a lot on is what I've watched with add rich graphics to your SwiftUI app. This is a very important watch, especially if you're dealing with a lot of graphics and layout and stuff. So this is we don't have a ton, like compared to last year where we had grid layout, we had they were closing a lot of loops. So the first year of SwiftUI felt like it was very much like a beta, right? It was not really production ready, even though you can do a really simple app. The second year, which is last year of SwiftUI, they were closing a lot of the loops, which means that you can build apps 100% using SwiftUI. So that was the focus of the second year. But of course, as we've experienced, there was a couple of bugs, not impossible to fix, but for example, some weird bugs where if you have 2 results in your list, you tap on the detail view, it automatically goes back. But that only happens when you have 2 results. It's kind of weird, but it is what it is. But this year, it feels like everything is really polished and everything is really like fast, which is really exciting. That means that the argument that you can't use SwiftUI in a production app is no more, except of course if you have to support like really old version of iOS, for example. But I think it's pretty safe you have to remember that people who use iOS 15 can still download an app that is on SwiftUI 2, for example. So the app that we have is using SwiftUI 2, and it's going to be pretty much seamless. I haven't really noticed additional bugs on iOS 15, as I've been testing on iOS 15 versus we have people on iOS 14. I don't really see a lot of bugs on top of that. In fact, the app is, like I said, more performant now. So this is really exciting. And of course, if you want to use the new APIs, you're going to have to use, support iOS 15. But otherwise, you can still use SwiftUI 2, and it's going to work for iOS 14 and 15 at the same time. So these are the really important watch that I would say that you should watch, specific for design. But there's more. I haven't watched all of them. I'm going to definitely spend a lot more time watching these videos. So let's go into what we're going to be exploring today, okay? And I think it could be really exciting. So for example, like I mentioned before, SF Symbol 3 is what is really new this year, okay? What is really exciting is that, first of all, they have 3,000 icons now, compared to about 2,000 last year, and the first year was about 1,000. So I guess increments of 1,000 every year, I guess. But what is more exciting this year is that they made it super easy for you to create your own custom icons. In fact, previously you had to kind of like save as a template, and you have to replace, you know, I think like 24 instances of the same icon using a lot of the rules. It's very complex. I think with SF Symbol 3, if I understand correctly, you only need 3 versions, which, if I remember, is thin, then regular, and then bold. So they're gonna do everything in between. So you only need to generate 3 versions of your template. But what is more exciting to me is that now we have 4 versions, 4 variants of these icons. So if you want to take a look at the inspector, which is new now, you, like a lot of the icons, have 4 variants. So you have the monochrome, which is what you see right now. You have the hierarchical, really hard to say in English. This is essentially using one color with transparency. So you're gonna have like, you know, let's see if I can select that here. So I'm going to be able to, let's say, change the color to cyan. And you can see that each of these icons have a main color and a secondary color, which is using opacity. And that makes your, you know, symbol even more exciting and even more customized to your branding. And you know, the background is not part of it. Obviously, it's the UI that's going to dictate the background. But with a single color, you can have, you know, different variations depending on how many layers that you have in your icon. So I believe there are up to three kind of layers that can be customized. So you have the main color, and then you have sort of like the secondary, and then the tertiary. And then you have the palette. So what is the difference is that the palette, instead of having a single color, you can customize essentially 3 colors. And it's going to apply all 3 colors separately to your icons. So you can see here, depending on the icon, you're going to be able to customize all of that. And by the way, all of these colors can be customized in your code as seen right here. So using, I believe, is the foreground style. So this is new. The foreground style is kind of like the background modifier, where you can have a lot of stuff, like multiple colors. You can have a gradient, you can have a material sheet, and all of those colors can be separate in the way that the icon is organized. So the first color, the second color, and the third color, again, you can see here, the first one is using opacity, the second one is using blue, and the third one, which is the circle, I believe, is using is using linear gradient, right? So you have a ton of options, and all of this is applying to the icon itself. And then you have the different variants, which is, you know, do you want it to have a circle? Right? So if you don't have a circle, it's not going to have that frame anymore. And do you want to have the fill version or the stroke version? I think if you have the stroke version, it's just nothing, right? So you can see, instead of previously in SF Symbol 2, you had to do something like mic.fill. It's going to create the fill version, and then, you know, you're going to use, you were using the name, the system name of the icon to be able to customize that. But nowadays, you only need the base name, which is, let's say, just mic, and then you're going to be able to use the symbol variant to be able to customize if you want a fill version, a stroke version, and also if you want to have plus the circle version or not, right? Like, it's really, really cool. And let's say I don't have the dot fill and only circle, then you know, I don't have that circle background anymore. But the stroke, I believe, is using the gradient. So a ton of customization. This is actually what I wish I was able to do for Shape, which is the project that we work on. We do it a little bit differently, but to see how they, Apple managed to make this all customizable is really inspiring. And for developers, this is a godsend, right? Like, essentially, you don't need to design or to download any custom icons, and you have a ton of customizations. The same for designers working with developers. They're gonna be able to go crazy. As I mentioned before, you can play with flat colors, opacity, gradients, and material background blur. I learned something also, which is the image scale. Before I didn't know it was the scale relative to the text, but now I know. So essentially what you want to be able to do is, let's say you have a text next to your image. So let me see if I can do that right now. So I have my text. Okay. So let's see. I'm going to apply to both of them. So 100 to both. Now, when you change the image scale, it only applies to the icon and not the text. So if you want an icon, the reason why it's like this is because it's really important to align the text and the icon together, which is why we have all of these guides when we create these custom icons, and the icons are already comes like that. But now, if I want my icon to be smaller relative to the text, then I would use the image scale small. So that's the difference. You use the font size to determine the icon and the text, or the icon by itself, to change the size in terms of scaling. And then you use the image scale to scale the icon relative to the text if both of them sort of have the same size. So it's really, really exciting. And, we have a ton of customizations now. Symbol variant, as I mentioned before. And then the rendering mode, which is what I mentioned here, is monochrome, hierarchy, palette, and multicolor. Multicolor is the default colors. So if the icon came sort of like, with these preset colors, then it's going to stick to that, plus I think the main color, if I'm not mistaken. So you can see that some of these icons have default colors such as red and white. Some of them don't have all default colors. So some of those colors are customizable. And yeah, so that's the difference between the four. Monochrome, a single color based on what you choose. Multicolor is a single color plus the default colors if we have multiple colors. And then we have hierarchy, which is a single color plus opacity. And then we have palette, which is triple colors if the icon supports it. So if my icon have 3 layers that are customizable in colors, then I can choose those. All of this is customizable in this SF symbol, which is a new feature, was not there before. And also another thing that is new in SF symbol is that you can create your own library of icons. So you can have like your collection of icons for your own project, and you're going to be able to save those to your favorites. And also, I believe that from here, you can duplicate as a custom symbol. So you can have your own name, for example, car, circle, whatever, 2. And you can have your own names, and then you can have your own template. So when you have your own custom symbol, then you want to be able to edit this from the template. So export template, and then you edit this in Figma or Sketch. and then you only need to generate 3 versions, which is, I think, fine. Oh, no, sorry, not fine, but light, regular, and then bold. So from those, they're going to be able to interpolate and then do all the remaining, I believe, 18 or something like that, or 21, depending on the total amount. And so it's really cool. And I would love to hear, like, one thing that we thought at Design Plus Code was to say, should we create a collection of custom icons? Because, you know, we have 3,000 icons right now from Apple, but obviously I wouldn't be surprised if designers would want to create like a collection of custom icons. So, you know, let me know if we should create custom icons and share that. I think that could be interesting. You know, because we have like a pretty crazy amount of icons ourselves at Shape. And then what we would need to do is to customize all of those icons to make it fit with SF symbols. So using their guidelines, using their template, and then we're going to be able to support the same rendering modes, such as monochrome, hierarchy, palette, and multicolor. You're going to be able to, you know, use that. And there's like, if you watch the video, you can essentially export everything to SVG from this. You know, you can copy as image. So copy image. And in your design tool, you're going to be able to find the image. I believe that you can essentially do that with SVG as well. Let me just see if I'm mistaken. Image as. Right, so SVG as well. So you can see, you can copy image as SVG using the point size and the pixel scale, and then copy image. And when you do that and you paste that to your design tool, whoops, it doesn't seem to be working for some reason. Let me see, let me try again. All right, so copy image as, and then SVG, copy. Oh, okay, so the paste here is not working on Figma for some reason, but I believe that it should be working with Sketch. I haven't installed it in my new computer, so I won't be able to test it in front of you. But you can see that the image works. So, but this is not in vector, unfortunately. Okay. You're gonna be, you know, if you want to edit everything in vector, you're gonna have to copy that as SVG, and I'm pretty sure that, you know, Figma, or, well, Sketch, I'm pretty sure that it supports the copy and paste, but I'm pretty sure Figma will probably support it soon. So that's kind of like the process for designers. Kind of like if you want to use, like if you want to create a custom icon, customize the custom icon, including all the colors and stuff like that, and then you want to put that back to your design tool in your official design, in your comps, and you know, use that as a bitmap or as a vector using SVG. So that's how you do it. Now in code, super easy, right? All you need to do is just, you know, one thing that I wish, and I hope Apple is listening to this one, is they should have like export code in SF symbols, right? Like, who agrees with me? There should be an export code here. Copy the code, and I would get all of these beautiful settings such as symbol variant, symbol rendering mode, foreground style. I don't need to do it from scratch, right? So let's get Apple to do this, right? All right. So yeah, this is really exciting about SF symbol. Let's go to the next thing that I've explored. So we've explored, you know, I've explored a lot with a material. So previously, if you wanted to do a background blur like this thing, you would need to either copy the code from Apple, their app called Through the App. They have like a piece of code, which is a Swift file. You have to drag and drop to your project, and then you use their little library. The second option that we had was to use a third-party library, like a Swift Package Manager. One of my favorite ones is called SwiftUI X, and that's what we use a lot in our demos. But now, thankfully, that means that, well, thankfully in SwiftUI 3, we don't need to do that anymore, and it's even easier than before. You know, before it was kind of like you use a background, it's kind of like its own little element. But now what you can do is use the background modifier, and as part of the background modifier, you can use dot and then ultra thin, or the normal one is called regular material. And on top of that, before in the preview, if you didn't press play, the background blur did not work properly. So you have now, even if you don't have it on play, it's going to show it properly. And also when you click on play, of course. And you can also save one line of code, which is typically you do a mask and then you do a rounded rectangle. But now they have this little in property where you can set the shape for your background blur. And so that's really exciting. What I find it more exciting is that this is kind of like mix and matching with the color, which means that I can essentially use these settings in a lot of other places, not just for the background property, but also for the foreground style, right? And so because of these like foreground style and then regular material and stuff and dot linear gradient, we have a lot of new possibilities in terms of customizing the user interface, including, for example, if I want to be able to set a gradient on a text, I can now use the foreground style dot linear gradient. Previously, what I had to do was, I believe I had to do some sort of like a mask plus gradient. And, you know, it was a lot of code. So now this saves a ton of code and it makes it so much more manageable. So this is really exciting for me. And, you know, I haven't seen all the application of it throughout the app, but for now, this saves a lot of work. And one thing that I love about SwiftUI is that compared to React, for example, compared to a lot of other platforms, I don't have to install anything at all except for Xcode for a lot of the things, for 99 of the things that I need to work. If you work on a React app, for example, or Angular or any of those other platforms, typically you rely on so many of these, you know, frameworks that doesn't really come baked in. This is important because if you think about it, for example, if you want to do CSS or Sass or stuff like that, well, you have to install like a third-party library just for something that's so basic. But in SwiftUI, everything is baked in. And especially, this is especially relevant to SwiftUI 3. Everything is just baked in SwiftUI 3 now. And it's so mature, it's so performant now. I wouldn't be surprised that why they waited so long to include, you know, all of these options such as the background blur is because they wanted to wait on performance. And you know, I think that makes a lot of sense. We've had a lot of testing, you know, in our app. We had to add like a light mode version where we disable some layers that had background blur because of performance. So hopefully with iOS 15, this is not going to be as much in the way of performance, and we can really go crazy with all the things you want to do with, you know, design. Which leads to the third big topic I want to discuss today, and that is the Canvas API. The Canvas API, for those who don't know, is a new way to draw, to draw like graphical elements in your application. So let me just pull SwiftUI. And I discovered about this not from the WWDC, but after reading their text. So there's a part where it says, you know, enhance your app with new features and stuff like that, and search experience, focus areas, and control. And then they mentioned about Canvas API. And I was like, what is Canvas API? This sounds new. So the way they explain it it's a modern GPU accelerated equivalent of DrawRec. Now, I'm not super familiar with DrawRec and stuff like that. There's probably a lot of legacy stuff that maybe I was probably too young back in the day to know about it. Not saying that I'm young at all, but you know, I haven't done iOS development for, you know, I've only started doing iOS development since Swift, well, seriously speaking, of course, since the end of Objective-C and then the beginning of Swift, which means that's about 7 years ago. And so a lot of these things existed before me. And yeah, so this is the new way. So the way I understood it from watching the WWDC video is that if you have a lot of graphics, so a lot of graphics, what I mean by that is that, let's say you have a background like this, that depending on how you organize your background and your animations, it can really impact performance, especially when you're creating games. For example, if you have a lot of these visual effects, these I don't remember the names, but like these diffuse fire animations and explosions and stuff like that. Not saying that we're gonna need it anytime soon, but we never know in 2-3 years, right? Like design is evolving constantly, and maybe in 2-3 years, 3D is gonna be commonplace. You know, diffuse effects, fire, you know, and you know, nowadays in iMessage, we're seeing these New Year's Eve kind of like fireworks, or when you you know, when you celebrate someone's birthday and you say happy birthday, there's like a ton of balloons and confetti. Well, all of those things have to be done using animations, right? Not saying that you need it in your app, but if the performance permits it, right? If the technology allows you to go crazy a little bit more on the effects, then why not, right? It makes things a lot more fun, you know, like you say something to someone, happy birthday or happy new year, and they get these fireworks. It's fun. Or in the Apple Watch, when you get an achievement, you have a badge, you have this 3D badge. The question is, how do you do it? And the second question is, how does it affect performance? Because as designers and developers working together, the designer definitely wants it, okay? That's the thing. The designer wants it. The developer is going to be resistant because first, the developer doesn't know how to do it, typically, because they haven't explored all those things most normally. The second thing is performance. So as designers who code, we need to understand performance, and then we need to be able to implement those things ourselves so that everyone's happy and the device is happy, so we don't have performance issues. So back to the topic of Canvas API. Now you have a graphic like this one, for example. You have you know, stars and you know, skylines, and you know, you want to be able to, let's say, animate some of the stars, some of the falling stars, some ups. So there's a lot of things that the designer can think of to make the app so much more interesting. You know, maybe some of you remembers when we used to have Game Center and then we have these bubbles. That was fun. I really loved it. But you know, someone has to animate it, and the second question is, how does it affect performance, right? So all I'm trying to say is that this is a use case, and now we're gonna look at the example. So let's take a look at Canvas, and we're gonna play this. So this is not much, obviously, and I just want to show you that what this is essentially using is a wrapper called Canvas. And this is going to return a context and a size, which is the size of the canvas itself. The context is used to either fill or draw or whatever you want to put into it. And then anything else is essentially using Swift. So very much the same way you would do it in UIKit. So in this case, we're using the timeline view to set the animation. Now, this was confusing to me at first when I was playing with canvas, the first question you're going to be asking is like, how do you animate things, right? Like, if you want to take a look at the tutorial, you can do option click here, and it's going to give you an example for the developer documentation. And this, by the way, everyone should do it. Like, if you're learning SwiftUI, you're learning Swift, Xcode, whatever it is, option click everything, and then go into the documentation. The documentation has become so much better over the years, so we are extremely lucky, especially if you're starting SwiftUI now. You are lucky because the documentation is so much better than the first year, for example. So what I love especially about the new documentation is that they do give you sample code, and they don't just give you a wall of text. They also give you a sample code that you can literally copy and paste to your project, and it's gonna give you the result right on. So let me see. I have this one. There you go. So I copy their piece of code, and it does exactly what they have here. I didn't even need to read anything. All I need is the sample code, and then try it right away. Now, this is how I learned, by the way. The second question is like, how do I customize this? Like, for example, okay, line width, I kind of understand it. I'm gonna set, instead of 4, I'm gonna set it to 10. Okay, I understand the frame. This is familiar from SwiftUI. And, maybe I don't want a frame. Okay, so this is an ellipse, which means that it's gonna grow if I don't set a frame. So what this means is that the shape, the canvas itself is like a shape. It takes the maximum width and height. And then you start reading what's going on. So the canvas returns a context and size, and the context itself is what is used to draw whatever you need to draw. So for example, here I'm drawing a stroke. For those who have used the stroke in SwiftUI, is essentially the border, okay? And so the stroke needs to be drawn, as part of the shape using a path. And this is where it gets a little bit more complex from SwiftUI, is that you have to understand that here we're drawing a path, and then the path is an ellipsis, which is inside a CG rect. So this is the part that gets a little bit complicated if you haven't done Swift before. So the size value being width and height. So what this means is that unlike SwiftUI, which takes care of the layout and the adaptiveness by default, Canvas is more the traditional way of doing it, such as in CSS. It's going to start from the top left, it's going to draw, and then you're going to have to position everything manually. And then we're using width to color. So for example, if I use .cyan, it's going to color it. Then I can customize the line width. So we don't need a border here. So yeah, that was confusing to me. I thought the border was when I select things, but in fact, it was a custom border. I don't know why they added that code, just to tease us. And if you don't want a custom frame, then it's just going to be an ellipse. So that's just normal SwiftUI code. So SwiftUI is mixed with Canvas. Everything is inside Canvas is what we're using, to draw stuff. Now, with this in mind, let's take a look at, the timeline animation. So I can't promise that I'm going to go all the way with all the steps because I don't fully understand everything yet. But timeline view is what we're using. Parentheses dot animation. So apparently they have some different ways to set the timeline. And then we're going to set curly braces, returning timeline in. So let me just put this inside while wrapping around the canvas. So let's try to understand what timeline is. Timeline, if you have done something like After Effects or a lot of the animation tools that exist right now in Vision Studio, Flinto, Principle, a lot of those apps use timeline. What it means is that you can set how your animation looks like at different timing, at 1 second, 0.5 second, 2 seconds. So what we're essentially trying to do here is to do exactly that, but in code. And so that's the thing. And yes, it gets complex, which is why I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do this part. All right, so let me just make sure that I have some code to refer to. But if you don't understand, if you want to watch it, this is definitely taken from the WWDC video. Like I said, add rich graphics to your design. So we're going to start with the now. Okay, so let now is equal to timeline.date.time interval since reference date. Okay, if I understand correctly, this is essentially saying, you know, the time in seconds, you know, and it's going to move over time. So I'm going to use that variable, that constant, and then I'm going to turn that into an angle. Now, before I do that, maybe I should show you how to apply a text, for example. So I'm going to use context dot, I think it's draw, and then text. Okay, so when you draw in Canvas, you can draw a stroke, you can draw a fill. So if you have done shapes in SwiftUI, you're kind of familiar with that. Fill is if you want to draw this. So for example, if I want to do fill instead of stroke, and I don't need the line width, so this should be just my circle. Boom, right? Fill or stroke. And then I'm using the color. Now, we've learned how to do the border. We've learned how to do a fill using a shape. Now let's talk about drawing a text or an image for that matter. So if you watch the video, they show you how to do it using an image or an SF symbol being an image. But in this case, I'm going to use a text. So the text, which is a normal text in SwiftUI, my text, and then CG point. CG point is your X and Y position. So CG point XY 0, 0. Boom. So I have my text here inside my canvas. I can also remove this, by the way. So now I have my text to the top left. As I mentioned before, when you draw something in your canvas, by default, 0, 0 position from the top left. Okay, this is the same as CSS. So now if I want to move this a little bit, maybe I want to move it 100, 100. There you go. So this is my text. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to read what the hell is going on with now, because that's typically how I experiment with my animations, is to know what's going on with the values, right? When I drag things, when it's being animated, or when it's rendering stuff, I want to know what's going on. So here I'm going to print a value, and this in this case is now. Boom. So what we're seeing right now is that the timeline dot animation is giving us a timeline value, and that timeline value we are somehow using the date interval, time interval since reference date, and this is a result of that. And the question is, how do we use this result to be able to apply that to our animation? Right now we can't use it because it's like, how much is it? Like 645 million dot something. So I watched the video again, and this is not my code, but I thought it was kind of clever. They were able to transform the date into some sort of an angle. by using now dot reminder dot dividing by 3. So what this means is that, let's give it a try. I don't know what it means. Let's give it a try. So I'm using exactly that code, which is now that reminder dot divided by 3, and this is what I'm getting. So what I'm noticing here is that it's moving between minus 1.5 to 1.5. Now this can be useful. So if it's moving between these values, and by deducing that, that means that whatever number that I have here divided by 2, it's moving, let's say if I put 10, it's moving from minus 5 to plus 5. So there's a gap of 10. There's a difference of 10, if I understand correctly. So what they're doing here is that they're using 1.5 and they're multiplying that by 120, because the timing, I think, is constant. I mean, the speed at which the numbers move is constant, right? So if I set to 100, I can't really use it because it's just going 1 second incrementally like that. It's very slow unless that's what I want to move, right? So let's say, okay, maybe I can try it. I haven't tried it, but let's say if I want to try it and I want to apply this to my CG point, but here they're using a size, and let me use another CG rect so I can have more control. So CG rect, and then I'm going to use these 4 values: X value 0, 0, 300, 300. Okay, so this is my circle. I have more control now. And so what I'm going to do is plus and then that number. See? That's exactly what's happening. But you can see that it is animated. It's just barely animated. And I'm using exactly that number divided by 100, which means minus 50 to 50. If I want to make it faster, I'm going to set it to 10, for example. So now it's moving faster. Right? Yes, it is moving. You can barely see it. All right, so let's try 3. Okay. It's moving a little bit. You can barely see it. It's just 1.5, but you know, it's moving. But you can see that it's a bit problematic because it doesn't kind of like bounce back. You know, in animation where you're looping and it bounces back, it doesn't do that. It just goes here and then it restarts to the original position. And then, so obviously we're not gonna set divided by 100, otherwise it's too slow. But what I can say is using their number, and and then you multiply that, let's say, by 120. Okay. And so it's not applying yet, but let's say I do it here by 120. Okay, so you see that it's moving a lot more because I'm giving a big multiplier of 120. What this means is that instead of 1.5, it's 180. So it's moving back and forth like this. So that's what we have so far. But now what I want to do is be able to go back and forth without resetting the value. So what I'm going to do is to use their third line of code. Again, don't fully understand it, but I'm using an X position using cos and using angle.radians. So the angle, it's turning into a radians. So, and cos, if I understand, is this sinus thing. Don't fully understand. But anyways, this is going to solve our problem. So instead of using this custom number here, so let me just remove all of this stuff and just use X. So now we're going to see what kind of number that we're looking at. And I'm also going to apply to my number here. It's a bit slow. I mean, we're skipping a lot of frame because I'm doing a live stream. It's definitely better than before, but it's still not perfect. You know, at the end of the day, it's still an animation. And so you can see that it's just going back and forth. So the animation is bouncing back between those values. I believe it's 180. And so that's kind of the logic behind all of this stuff. And hopefully you understand and you're able to kind of take it from here and experiment with it. Now, let's take a look at the final demo that I had shown at the beginning. And also I want to show you how I've been able to create the wave. So this is what we have so far. Now let's talk about this code right here. So what this is a path. So that path can be applied to my canvas. And thankfully for designers, you're going to be able to use any of the path from your SVG. And I think that's really the exciting part, right? So let's say I want to use this little blob here. What I want to do from any design tool, such as Sketch and Figma, I'm going to be able to copy as SVG. And using that, I'm going to be able to go to the website or to any tool that is able to turn SVG code into Swift code. So I'm pasting that, converting it, and now I have my Swift code. So that's the first part. And this is how I was able to create the wave, not manually, because obviously I don't want to spend 15 minutes just drawing my wave manually. And this also gives me a lot of flexibility. All right, so going back here, I'm going to paste my code. All right, we have the beach ball. Hopefully I can move on. I think the more the live stream is going on, the slower the computer gets. So this is not a good sign. All right, so I can't really advance. All right, I'm gonna take some questions in the meantime while this is loading, or if it's even letting me to load. So I'm gonna take some questions. I think this is pretty much, very much at the end of the live stream. You know, I do want to discuss some of the new features, even though I won't be able to demo it. So for example, concurrency, which is the biggest new feature of SwiftUI, which allows you to deal with a lot of the network calls for APIs and stuff like that. So a lot of, like, you know, we're used to doing completions on top of completions and stuff like that. And, you know, concurrency is going to help a lot with the async await. Also, you know, there's a lot of new stuff such as refreshable. So they have a built-in pull to refresh. And they also have this beautiful new thing called async image, which typically on our side, we used to use SDWeb image, which is a third-party library. But yes, you know, I would have shown you the code, but essentially you're going to be able to customize the animation. You're going to be able to customize a lot of the, you know, a lot of the options, and you don't have to download a third-party library in order to do that. So that gives you a lot more power and flexibility. So async image is amazing, and I'm guessing that, you know, with async await, we're going to be able to do so much more as we explore into that technique. All right, so what Mac do I have? Yes, I have the new M1 computer, which is the iMac, and it's kind of mid-range. It's not like top range. Ooh, all right. Is it? it just went like on by a second and then it just stopped. Okay. I think Xcode is still acting. By the way, you know, I don't know why it's doing this. Before the live stream was just, everything was just going swimmingly. And it's definitely one of the most stable versions I've ever used of Xcode beta. By the way, this is beta 1, right? Like, let's not forget that this is beta 1. Typically, beta 1 is the most unstable version of all of them. But anyways, back to this, hopefully. I'm going to be able to show you the... I think it's just this view here. It's just giving me a lot of trouble. All right, so maybe I should not go back to this view. Okay. I'm just going to go back here and all right. Yeah, this is not looking good. I think it's the animations going on, which is on loop. It's definitely not helping. Yeah, maybe I should stop the animation so it doesn't build up. A lot of things to learn. Can you teach how to make a Swift package? That's a really good question. I don't know if a lot of people will want to learn how to make a Swift package. If you are interested, let me know. But we try to focus first on the things that we believe is going to be immediately useful to a lot of people in a lot of teams, such as if you work at a startup, if you work by yourself as an indie developer, if you work at a big company with developers. So I don't have my Chris on, which means that, yeah, you're definitely gonna hear my son screaming right now. I apologize for that. Okay, let me just go back here. And I'm not gonna move from this view anymore. So let's hope that everything works. All right, so I have my code here that I converted from SVG to my Swift code. But the thing is, from what I've been able to experiment, I can't really use the shape, but I can use the path. So if I use the struct, which is useful for SwiftUI, because in SwiftUI, you want to be able to use the shape. And you can apply the shape pretty much anywhere, like a button is a shape and stuff like that, rectangle is a shape. But in this case, I actually want to use the path, which means that I'm just going to use this code right here and cut it and put it in my main view, right? And I'm going to paste it here, right? So this is my code that I'm taking from the tool that I just showed you. Now, in order to use this path, I'm going to use the context.fill and use that path, which is a function, but it's returning a path. So the same way that I showed you, path in, and then cgrect. So a path meaning the name of my function, by the way. And here I'm passing values, including the rectangle, well, the cgrect, sorry, and the x value. So I want to use the x value because I want to pass the animation values. In this case, I'm using the x from my timeline animation. So I want to apply that to my wave. So I'm passing, first of all, the rect, which is what I have by default when I use my tool. And then second of all, I added a new value, so comma, x, and I'm passing the x from my animation value. Now, thanks to that, I'm going to be able to apply that to my animation. So I can use those values and it's going to update my wave. So let's say here, okay, so I applied to 2 places. Now, there's going to be a lot of experimentation. We have a lot of code here. It can be confusing, but it's not that hard to read, right? Like when you talk about a shape, in any design tool, you're talking about the XY position and the width and height. So the path itself, it has a move method, add curve, which is used for like the Bezier. If you look at the original design, I press enter, then I'm going to look at all of those vector points. I can edit because it's a component. Let me find, let me go to the main. All right, so here, all right. So you see all of these vector points are what draws this shape right here, right? So you have add curve, and then you need the position X, Y, width, and height. And then you have multiple curves, so multiple Bezier paths that compose the little wave. So in reality, this wave here is a giant blob that looks like this. Now the question is, how do I change the position using my timeline view and then passing the X animation value and then apply that? So if I remove this here, then you can see that only this part is animated. I can also animate it using the X position instead of the Y. So let's say I'm going to paste that here. So multiply by X. And now we have this little point here that is moving around. So that is kind of cool, right? And, you know, it's just experimenting. Just have fun. This weekend, just take this code and just have fun. You know, or, you know, go to your Sketch and Figma, draw a little circle or a little blob or a little wave, and then turn that into from SVG to Swift. Put the code, pass your animation value by using the timeline, and then play with the values, right? So now I'm just multiplying the X to create these effects. And that's it. That's how I managed to do it. So the noise cancelling software is called Crisp. It's really, really good. But right now it's not working. As you can see, we have a little exclamation point. It's not working on Monterey yet. So let me know if you have any question about this whole process. I think it's really fun. And I think Canvas API, if you look at the WWDC video, they're able to have like multiple sparks. You can, you know, generate hundreds or thousands of SF symbols on the same screen and then animate them based on a lot of these values. But at the basic level, this is what it looks like. And I hope this is more beginner friendly, because like I understand that if you watch those videos, it's definitely not beginner friendly. There's a lot of stuff that you need to understand before getting into it. But hopefully with this video, you have a good starting point and you can start as a beginner. As you know, just to go back to step one, we started with the canvas, the context and the size, and then we drew the stroke. So start with the documentation. With this code right here, draw your own shape, your own color, turn your stroke into a fill. And then the second part was to understand the timeline view. In this case, we're using animation, timeline, and then we're kind of like playing around with the values, turning that into an angle and making it loop back and forth. Then we learn how to use an SVG and turn that into Swift by only taking the path code that we actually need. So thanks to this method, we're going to be able to use any shape that you want. It can be your name written on it. It can be a logo. And then with all of these beautiful points, we can pass the value. So the animation value, and then we apply the animation value to any of these values such as X, Y, width, and height. And then just, you know, see what's going on with it after. So I hope this is fun. You know, obviously I couldn't cover everything, but these are the 3 main topics that I wanted to cover. SF Symbol 3, the new sort of materials, developer app, and then of course the Canvas API, which I find fascinating, and I'm definitely going to explore a lot more. You know, I really want to create beautiful blob animation and stuff like that, and this is kind of the start to what I actually want. You know, we're gonna see what's possible. Maybe I'm gonna be able to do some fireworks. Maybe we're gonna be able to do some, you know, some more crazy blob animations or stuff like that. So I think this is really fun. Yeah, Xcode looks really good. And do we have more comments? Yeah, it does. I mean, OBS seems to support M1 computer. Maybe that's also why the performance is not that great. I don't know yet. But this is the first time that I'm actually using OBS. Usually I use Ecamm Live. And hopefully it's working well. All right, so with this, thank you so much for coming to this live stream. I hope you enjoyed the demo. I'm going to be sharing this code to our subscribers, and I'm going to, you know, as usual, we share all the source files and we post the video without ads on our website, DesignCode.io. And if you enjoy this live stream, if you want to see more SwiftUI techniques in the next week, give it a like and subscribe, because every 3 p.m. on Friday, we do these live streams. So thank you so much for coming to this live stream. Have a great Friday.